So my name's Tim Morrow. I work at Shopzilla. I just want to say it's great to be back at Velocity. This is my third year, first time speaking. So today I'm going to talk about a few things. I'm going to talk a little bit about Shopzilla and our passion for performance. I'm going to talk about how we measure its value to our business. And I'm going to talk about how even small changes can still make an impact. So a little bit about Shopzilla. Shopzilla is passionate about changing the retail for the better. We build products that help shoppers shop and sellers sell. So we connect shoppers with over 100 million products from tens of thousands of retailers, reaching a global audience of over 40 million shoppers each month through our websites and our affiliate network. So, translation as an engineer means we get to work on challenging problems at a decent scale. So let's talk about performance. So we invest a lot of time, effort, acquiring traffic, whether it's through buying ads or working on search engine optimization or other means. So here's a couple of good quotes. Fred Wilson noted that speed is more than a feature. Speed's the most important feature. It's a requirement. And another quote, that I read that sort of supports this: it takes time, effort, and money to bring visitors to a website. So we want to make sure that their experience is pleasurable. We want it to lead to conversion, and we want them to come back. And I think performance has a lot to do with that. So yeah, we were here last year. We talked about the value of performance. We talked about how we re-architected our sites to make material performance gains. Now, obviously, you don't get to do that every year. So, but when we did that, it showed that we had improved paid traffic sessions. It increased our page views and our conversion rate, and it decreased the cost of ownership. And then, of course, like Google and Microsoft provided data that indicates poor performance can have a lingering effect on user behavior. People may use your site less even once you've corrected performance issues. And there's been lots of great data this year about the impact of performance on business metrics. So one other thing, of course, now that Google have incorporated site speed into search results, everybody's talking about performance from an SEO perspective. And if you haven't, you can log into Webmaster Tools and get a fairly depressing picture of the performance of your site. That's kind of like a whole other issue, though. So you can't take your eye off the ball. Bad things happen. Performance has a tendency to slip away. Performance doesn't improve itself. And you're never done with performance improvements. So let's talk about why we took our eye off the ball. Well, first of all, our site re-architecture that we did was necessary to get our server-side responses in check. But it's been well noted that once you've got your server-side response within a reasonable range, 80 to 90% of the time is spent on the front-end part of your site. So we had a lot of instrumentation. We had a lot of instrumentation on the back end. But we didn't have enough instrumentation on the front end. We weren't really looking at the right things. We weren't continually testing for front-end performance. And we love features. We release new features to our site multiple times per week, but there's a tension between features and performance. The added complexity and constant change tends to unravel performance. For example, we continuously run split or A/B tests, so we have different versions of JavaScript, CSS, images, page templates, layouts, all at the same time. And it's hard, it's challenging to keep all that stuff straight. And then even actually one more thing, display ad campaigns. We find that adding new or different display ad campaigns to our site can actually impact performance. So what is the cost of ignoring performance? Well, one thing is, hopefully you won't see something like this. Performance will tend to degrade over time. But if you're not constantly obsessed with performance, it's easy to give back all those gains, that we talked about before. And people notice. We collect surveys from people visiting our site, and these are some actual quotes. If it's slow, it sucks, I'm not going to come back again. So, people like fast sites. Of course, it's simpler and cheaper if you've infected all your teams with performance in mind. It's simpler and cheaper to tackle performance modifications in the early part of your development cycle rather than waiting until you notice problems in production or lower traffic or lower revenue and fixing it then. And of course, when we finally tackle performance, we don't have a dedicated performance team. We try to make sure that every team is interested in continuous improvement. And so when we actually had to spend some time working on performance, there's an opportunity cost there. So what was our approach? So we put together some people to tackle performance, a performance task force, or I guess a virtual performance team. And we wanted more measurements. We really wanted to understand what is the performance of our site. So things like measure the time to first byte, measure progressive rendering stats, measuring how long it takes for the header to appear, how long it takes for the above-the-fold content to appear, as well as full page load. And so we did this through more automation. We wanted to be able to run, we monitor our systems in production using tools like Keynote, and there's many tools that you can use to do that. But we also wanted to be able to preemptively test the performance of new features before we release them. So we wanted a system and a framework that would automatically test front-end performance or a complete page performance that we could run either on demand or nightly. So we actually built a system that allows us to execute performance in a real browser, Internet Explorer 7, and we actually use HTTP Watch. And we take the output, the waterfall graph, and we interpret that to figure out each of the different performance metrics that we're interested in, whether it's header render time, above the fold, or full page load. So we actually configure this Internet Explorer browser to proxy through a server where we shape the traffic. We use NetM to simulate real bandwidth. While, of course, you can work on performance, or you can make performance changes, sitting at your desktop on a high-speed link, it's quite an eye-opener to see your performance results come back and say, hey, for some of your users, it's taking 8 seconds for a page to load. So what did we find when we did this? Well, so we had lots of good stuff. We had image sprites, we're using a CDN, we're dezipping our content, we're minifying things, we're splitting content across domains, we're using cookie-free domains. But we did find some opportunities. So progressive rendering, there's been a lot of talk about that. So we find that our web server, Tomcat, we knew that it automatically flushes content for us, but it's every 8K. And so we sat down and we looked at our web pages, and we find, of course, 8K is a lot. And if you look at the first 8K of any of your web pages, you might find that 25%, 50% of your page is within that first 8K. We also find that the look and feel components of our page, the images and the CSS, those were competing with other resources, like display ads and JavaScript. It was kind of like a free-for-all. And then we still find, even though we're using image sprites, we had too many requests, too many CSS files, too many JavaScript files. So these are the things that we were looking at. So we wanted to focus on the perception of performance. We wanted to deliver a better experience through progressive loading of our page, give the user the impression that the page is performing faster. So get the content to the user quicker, show progress through progressive rendering, and render all our visual aspects first and defer the less important content so that they're not competing. So I'm going to talk about the specific changes that we made. So I took a waterfall graph of one of our pages after we made our changes, and I grouped all the components in the waterfall graph by the type of component. And this was from sort of fairly low-end DSL. Now, if you look at full page load, it's 3 seconds. It's still not very good. But I'd like to point out then some of the things that we did. So first of all, we took control over the progressive rendering. We added flush commands in certain spots so that we could both render the head portion of the page and get the browser downloading CSS while the server's still working. We flushed the visual header of the page so that the user sees our logo, sees the header, sees the search box. And that cut the time to first byte down from 400 milliseconds to 200 milliseconds. We combined CSS files, we combined JavaScript files, we deferred our JavaScript loading to further down the page. So JavaScript no longer loads with the page. And so we also sort of reorganized and took control over when we invoked our display ads. They're actually one of the biggest contributor to both content and the number of requests on our site. And so, of course, there's also, you have to be careful, right? You don't want to defer display ads too far because then you might, not get the impression. So the net result of this is that the header and above the fold renders in sub-second times, even on low-end bandwidth. So the question here is, did anybody notice? It certainly felt faster. It's great, when the president of your company sends an email and says, wow, yeah, the site's great, it's fast, but, he's not really a representative user. So conversion rate did increase. It increased by 0.4%. But wait, okay, that doesn't sound like very much. Last year you got 5%, 7%, 12% conversion rate increases. But first of all, this is comparable to some feature releases that we do. We also only worked on a couple of pages on a single property, bizrate.com. And this does go straight to our bottom line. So let me say it another way. Based on the amount of time we invested in making these simple performance chains, our return on investment, we got that back within 2 months. And so after that, it's just gravy. And I'll leave it up to you to figure out whether that gravy is worth $1,000, $10,000, or even $100,000 per month. So we actually also we didn't just focus on front end, we performed an infrastructure audit. We took a look at our hardware utilization, we took a look at hotspots during peak times, we looked at underutilized hardware resources. And so we created a new deployment recipe that would better use the hardware that we had. And we actually found that we estimated $480,000 in savings on deferred hardware costs through better use of our hardware. And so it turns out that the ops guys can save you money too. So in summary, if you want to take something away from this, performance is an important feature, but performance isn't free. You have to work on it. And performance does have a measurable value. So in my opinion, it's worth it. That's all I got. Thank you.